am Mohammed Izzat. I am presenting the accumulation of my research for automating architecture and urban design. I have 6 publications. You can find them down in the description of the video for this goal, for the creative automation of architecture and urban design. For doing so, I am proposing the constructability of a comprehensive conceptualization of urban construct that is based on an ontology of urban construct, a 3-perspectival ontology of urban construct, based on which a knowledge base is constructible, and this knowledge base can be used as a basis for computation to augment a creative design process. This is the core of what I'm presenting today. So this is the problem that we have. We are seeking a conceptualization that is shareable between computation and between the human agents. By the human agents, we mean the users, the designers, the stakeholders. This common conceptualization of shareable should conceptualize the physical. The physical can be represented by the architectural basic elements of walls, openings, slabs, structural topologies, or the urban basic elements of natural elements, parcels, land utilities, entries, facades, streets, crossings, and so on. The composition between these basic elements represent the physical, and the goal is to reach a conceptualization. The base, the intrinsic meaning, the core meaning that is related to these physical elements. So this is our proposal. We are proposing an ontology of urban constructs that is constructed of 3 perspectives. Based on these 3 perspectives, on the understanding of these 3 perspectives, the physical and the conceptual is going to be unfolded. So the physical and the conceptual will be unfolded under the single umbrella of the ontology of urban constructs. By the physical, we mean a description of the physical itself. So actually, the unfold of the ontology, we are departing the physical on the sake of describing the physical or for structuring the conceptual. Natural language is the continuum, the non-continuum of the concepts, and our goal then to structure the concepts found in the natural language using the ontology. So the ontology here is the unilateral tool of analysis for both of these 2 works. By the end, you will sense that the physical can be described by a labeled graph, and the conceptual will be a structuring of the concepts found in natural language under the contentious of the 3 perspectives, the visual, emotional, and rational perspectives that is proposed to comprehensively conceptualize urban constructs. The mapping between the different composition, the graph here that will describe the physical is just a graph of the activities labeled by the physical elements, the rational physical elements, and ultimately described by the visual modifiers. The designer in general, the human agents like the user, the designer, the stakeholder, may sit down together and start composing different compositions over this labeled graph. And due to the computational acknowledgement of the various facets of understanding of these constituents of the graph, over this mapping, computation can come up and propose inspiring alternatives based on which the design process can be motivated. The approach that we are proposing is phenomenological in nature. The leaders, the founders of the phenomenology as a science, e.g. Husserl and Heidegger, and the phenomenology as a science in general is always seeking for universalities. So what we are proposing here, the 3 perspectives, are proposing the minimal variant of urban constructs based on which all the variants of urban constructs can be structured underneath these variations. So this is actually at the core of urban identity. Phenomenology is the analysis of spatial experience or an experience in general, and it's subjective, of course, and this is why it's the interrelation between the fields and urban identity is huge. We may imagine a part of the city or a neighborhood or a city or a country that is somehow mixing or compositing some of the qualities and characteristics of the visual with the rational or the emotional different than may be implicated in other regions of the world. So the study that we are presenting is automating architecture and urban design based on the knowledge base. Of course, this would switch us to the main composition that we are seeking, that a knowledge base, the conceptualization of the physical, that is shareable between the human agent and the computation. The problem is actually how we can find a phenomenological knowledge base that's shareable between the different parts of the design process. Because if such a knowledge base exists, computation can acquire this knowledge base, and the shareability between computation and the human agent is resolved all at once. So this is what we are seeking. We are seeking a universal scheme that's shareable between the different identities found in the urban constructs, and this is done by constructing or by structuring all of the variants found in urban constructs in a coherent and consistent way, and this is a knowledge base that we are presenting and we are proposing at the base of automating architecture and urban design creativity. It happens that we are in the rise of the fifth industrial revolution. The fifth industrial revolution is all about creativity and innovation. In the first industrial revolution, it was about the steam engine. The fourth was about AI, big data, robotics, Internet of Things, augmented reality, AX, and all that stuff. But in the fifth, which is on the rise right now, is all about bringing computation into the world of creativity to raise the creativity of the community in general, raise the creativity of the society, of course, in different fields. One of the main interpretations of how you can augment computation with human agents in a creative design process is that computation should acquire fundamental knowledge about specific knowledge domain upon which computation may augment the cognitive ability of the human agents. And this is the rule of what we are proposing in general. So this is the framework. This is the framework. If we look closely at this framework, we may look at that when the composition happened between the human agents during the design process, computation will aid in disclosing the various aspects, the various realities embedded or implied in a cognitive way to these to what is embedded in the labeled graph. So actually, discovering this reality will enable computation to play a part in creativity by exploring and reinterpreting these various realities that will be disclosed shortly. The approach that we are proposing is consequently knowledge-based. Computation can construct the knowledge about urban constructs by its own using big data, and it would then aid us human agents during the design process based on the constructed detailed conceptualization of urban construct, and this is opposed to the algorithmic approach, which is not viable in a complex profession like architecture. We are not expecting to get a talented architect feeding his or her story about architecture in a computational memory as a way to have a computer aiding in a creative design process. It has always to be a knowledge-based approach. The proposal that we are unfolding that the ontology should unfold into a descriptive and then into the conceptual, both of which compose the mapping between these two realms, the physical realm and the conceptual realm. The mapping between these two realms consume what is named the comprehensive conceptualization of urban constructs, has its root in a human cognitive system. We, as a human cognitive system, when we are subjected with any stimulus like an image or a sound, or we may sense something, all of these physical elements, like the basic composition of the artificial and the urban elements, are always transferred into something intermediate. The different band of representation than the physical is then mapped into the realm of the conceptual, and this mapping is what consumes the conceptualization that is essential for all the attributes of the mind, or the functionality or the judgment that may occur through the mind. So the goal of having it as a knowledge-based computation based on big data can actually construct a conceptualization of urban constructs that is maybe for the moment beyond our recognition. Okay, but how would we judge that this approach is valid? Of course, during the unfolding of this whole approach, we'll find plenty of interesting moments that reflect with us and may give us the impression that yes, this is right, this is intuitive to all of us. But critically speaking, it's all about sufficiency. If you want to unfold these two realms by the ontology, then the approach is successful over two main criteria. The ontology has to be sufficient in describing the physical. Consequently, the labeled graph that will be proposed shortly has to be comprehensive in nature. It has to disclose any urban constructs on the basis of urban constructs. On the other hand, for the conceptual, there had to be coherence and consistency between all the disclosed statements or the disclosed relations found in the conceptual, because the concepts found in language is going to be structured under the contentious between the three perspectives. Based on this, all the concluded relationships had to be coherent and consistent in general. So the sufficiency of the ontology should reflect over these two realms, and based on these two qualities, we are going to evaluate the strength or the weakness of the proposal, which we will found to be quite strong and quite related to our intuitiveness. And this is actually reinforce our proposal that computation would augment human based on constructing knowledge about urban concepts. So intuitively speaking, each of the three perspectives is actually a theoretical urban environment by its own. Each one of these are continuum of symbols and relations and concepts, and the mapping between them is contained in one of these, and the difference evolve over the synthesis between these three extremes would consume all the variants found in urban constructs in a meaningful and structured way. One of the findings also is that rationality, all the forms of rationality found in the philosophy, the schools of philosophy, are exhaustible by these three perspectives. Meaning, what is meaning itself, as it has been disclosed by the different schools of philosophy, is also 100% disclosable by the three perspectives. During this presentation, we will accentuate on the concept of functionality as one of the concepts of natural language. We will construct this concept by the three perspectives, and we will test it for coherence and consistency to reach a conclusion regarding the viability of this knowledge base to achieve a knowledge base, the phenomenological knowledge base of urban constructs that is shareable between human and computational agents, and hence computation. This is the emerging point, the inception point for computation to play unprecedented role in design creativity in the field of architecture and urban design. Based on these constituents, we are going to structure our presentation as the following. In the first part of the presentation, we will focus on the ontology. This is the starting point. In the introduction, we will lay out how these three perspectives has its traces in the architecture and the urban movement theories and urban constructs from history to the moment. All of them are categorical can be clustered under any or both or several of these perspectives. After that, we are going to come up with a cluster of qualities that clearly distinguish each of these perspectives from the others. The qualities will be categorized under three categories of CausedBy, causes, and SymbolOf. After reaching an understanding of these three perspectives by the qualities that differentiate clearly any one of these from the others, we are going to unfold the physical and then the conceptual. The physical will be unfolded by constructing the labeled graph, which will then be proved to be comprehensive in describing an urban construct, using the qualities of the three perspectives from one hand, and from another we're going to examine the viability of these three perspectives in structuring the concepts found in natural language by examining the single concept of functionality using these three perspectives. Under that, we are going to investigate the possibility for computation to structure a comprehensive conceptualization by its own. Computation based on these incepting points can utilize big data to structure a conceptualization of urban construct that we may have not to the point acquired, but computation can get the comprehensive conceptualization that can aid us during the design process. So the first step in the proposed model is to understand the ontology. The ontology is manifested by analyzing the movement, the theories, and the urban constructs from history to the moment. We came up that all of these can be clustered under one or any of the basic three perspectives. The visual perspective can be exemplified by general purpose Romanian building, perspectival and pictorial driven designs, plus plenty of other examples. The emotional can be exemplified by the sprawl and the spontaneous settlements. So when we are saying the sprawl and the spontaneous settlements, we mean the emotional perspective, while the rational perspective is exemplified by Gothic architecture, international style, and the modern rationalism. We need to keep in mind that these three perspectives are theoretical. They are theoretical tools for analysis. These are the least unique elements found in the realm of urban constructs. And we are using these three basic, primary, unique dimensions to understand and to structure all the other variants found in urban constructs. So these are theoretical tools of analysis. And these examples are just exemplification of what these three perspectives may stand for. The main thing that we have to present concerning these three perspectives, because we are going to utilize these three perspectives to construct a knowledge, to construct a knowledge base, that they are contrasting. By contrasting, we mean that these three perspectives are independent of each other. Each one of these can consume a realm by its own, but at the same time, there are no less or more perspectives were found to understand urban constructs. Consequently, if we don't have a fourth or a fifth other perspective to understand urban constructs that is unique in its own, that's independent, that doesn't need any of the other perspectives to be defined, this entails that these three perspectives are consuming the continuum of urban constructs, and all the variants can belong to one or any of the other group perspectives, or the synthesis between these three perspectives. And this is the base of the assumption that we are presuming that urban constructs and that knowledge-based urban constructs can be constructed using these three perspectives. The contrastability between these three perspectives is going to be visited after we understand the spatial features or the description of the physical and the description of the conceptual. The spatial features is named and the spatial concepts. So to come up, the movement that we presented here are exemplification. To come up with something crystal clear that distinguishes the three perspectives, we need to come up with qualities rather than by movement. And some examples, we need to come up with qualities. So we found that the qualities that can clearly distinguish these three perspectives from each other insets from some basic elementary qualities. Based on these qualities, other qualities can intuitively and deductively be constituted. The first level is the CausedBy. These are the qualities that is causing or that can be used to explain the existentiability of any of these three perspectives. The visual perspective is a product that is dictated by a designer, that is an artist, a poet, a musician. This artist is manifesting the formalities of this product based on the philosophization of some inspiring elements or ideas in general. Based on that, we can look at the visual perspective as a macro scale perspective that's always generated from a totalitarian authority. This authority is manifesting or defining a product based on a philosophy of some inspiring element. So the shaping of the product is always a formal product that is in dialoguing with some philosophization that is authored by a higher level goal. So it's a macro scale. This is the visual perspective. Nonetheless, the emotional perspective, which can be exemplified by the sprawl or the spontaneous settlements, is a process, an ongoing, endless process between its compositing ingredients. These ingredients can be human beings, can be building, can be the constituents of this environment. The environment itself is nothing but a continual process that is always reflecting the interaction between its compositing agents. These agents can either collaborate or compete during this process, and this is why these processes always emerge from the bottom up. It is a micro-scale based process, and it emerges and it constructs and emerges into a democratic society based on the interaction between these elements. The rational perspective, on the other hand, is a logical perspective. It's a reductionist perspective. The most important thing for the rational perspective is that the whole is 100% explainable and attributable to its constituents. There's a constituents, or the summation of the constituents always sum up to the whole. The whole is 100% explainable by its parts. It's a logical, reason-based perspective, and based on the logicality and the reasoning found in this perspective, it's a mechanistic perspective. It's not a product-based, nor a process. It's a mechanistic, and it's structured in nature. These are the qualities that were found to distinguish clearly any of the three perspectives from each other on the level of qualities, and these causing qualities will result in different aspects of each of the three perspectives. So for the visual products, the designs are timeless, because when an artist is philosophizing an idea, ideas can withstand time. They will not deteriorate or weaken after time. They are always a freezing moment of the idea, and it's timeless for nature. The uniqueness of the artist and the involvement of his or her interpretation and philosophization over inspiring ideas always guarantee the creativity and the uniqueness of these designs. So the visual designs are always creative in nature, and they are unique due to the uniqueness of its authoring entity. Inspiration plays an immersive tool in the reflection of the philosophy adopted by the artist or the designer of this perspective. On the other hand, the emotional perspective reflects aliveness. The ongoing endless interaction in the endless process that is shaping the emotional environment reflects the dimension of the aliveness and the vibrancy found of these environment. Individuality of this environment always is obvious. So we may have uniqueness in the visual perspective due to the uniqueness of the designer. Here, the individuality of each agent is playing a role in shaping the whole environment, and that's why the importance of each agent in shaping the environment manifested this environment as user-friendly and as humanistic as of humanistic nature, and it is naturalistic as well. On the rational perspective, because of the logic and the reasoning factors which are main players in the rational perspective, and because the whole is always contributed, 100% contributed and attributable to its parts, it reflected on the sense of integrity and truthfulness. The rational perspective doesn't recognize anything too useful unless it is truthful. Truthful is somehow related to the reductionist interpretation, that is, the whole is 100% attributable to its parts. Practicality, usefulness is always attributed in this perspective, plus ideality This is due to the structurality and the reductionist formation of these perspectives. These qualities, which are caused by, and then it results in certain qualities of each of the three perspectives, yielded some symbolic qualities that's related to each of the three perspectives. These are like formal characteristics of the products or the environments of the three perspectives. Again, we are now using the qualities to depart the vagueness of the examples that were stated earlier in the introduction about the three perspectives. We are now having clear qualities that can clearly signify or differentiate any of the three perspectives from the others. The visual perspective is of structural and figural dimension. When the authority is shaping the product-based philosophy, it always shapes it in a structural and figural form. Qualities like purity and literality can be found in these environments. We are not expected to have reflections. A goal, of course, of the environments here to interplay with purity and literality. It's like it's imaginary environment. The environment builds on ideas, and plus so it's an environment that is imaginary and unreal in nature. That's why fantasy and different variations can be found in these environment. Techniques like portrait or transfiguration, of course the techniques are a crucial role in the visual perspective, because it is always employed by the designer for shaping the figural environment. For the emotional, it is of societal dimensionality, and the plurality and individuality is always existent and traceable in this environment. Harmony between the competitive or the interaction between the agent is evident in this society, as well as spontaneity, because it's not explainable based on the formal issue. It is always explainable based on the interactive and the procedural issue. This may have its toll on the spontaneity and the intuition appearance of this environment, and it is of primitive nature as well. While the rationality, the logical approach, and the reductionist approach yielded its influence on this design to be minimalistic, because it always seeks purpose, and it's constructive, the ethicality, balance, fairness, openness has its toll on this environment, as well as punctuality and other strengths and uprightness, neatness, somehow related to the moral dimensions of this environment. So by doing that, we have now a basic understanding of the three perspectives. Our first goal is to unfold the physical and the conceptual by this qualitative understanding of the three perspectives. We are going to do that by unfolding the qualities of each of the three perspectives into a description of the physical. So what we mean by that? If we have an urban construct, a physical urban construct, and we take the qualities of each of the three perspectives and ask any of the three perspectives, can you please describe this urban construct for us? This perspective will come up with a description of the urban construct based on the qualities that we have disclosed earlier. So the visual perspective will describe the urban construct based on materiality. The rational will describe urban construct based on the constituting physical elements, while the emotional will describe any urban construct based on the activities. The accumulation between activities, physical elements, and the materiality can give us a comprehensive description of any urban construct. And this is one of the pillars that we are using to argue that the three perspectives can construct a comprehensive knowledge of urbanism by their own. When we are going to study each of the special features of the three perspectives, we will be always faced by two extremes. So when we are trying to understand any of the criteria or found for defining what is activity or what is physical element, what is materiality, we will be imposing detailed criteria for each of these, and each criterion will have two extremes. So we may have an element that is belonging to a white or a black, or somewhere in between we may have a variant that possesses some blackness as much as it may possess some variants of the whiteness. So for example, we may have a variation between between protect or delimit, ordered or chaotic, and any variant can be protect, delimit, or somewhere between. It may have some facets of the protective and others from the delimited. These two variants are meant to reflect the qualitative description rather than quantitative description. So if we are to start with the first one, which is the emotional perspective, it is the activities. The emotional perspective was found to be procedural, competitive and collaborative interaction between the agents. The harmonious between these and the interrelation between the agents is what constituting the environment. It was found that the activities occurring in the environment is the best description. And to define the activities, it's either to define the characteristic of a single activity by its own, or mainly with the interaction between the activities, and this is the spatial arrangement of the different activities. And this is why the emotional always perceive any urban construct on the sense of its on the sense of the activities. It doesn't matter for the emotional perspective the rational or the material. It is when it described based on the activities. And the spatial arrangement will have other subtitles. So based on this arrangement, we will come up with some detailed criteria. These criteria are all inherent and understandable based on the basic qualities found in the emotional perspective. This is the activities characteristic for a single activity by its own, and these are different variants of the spatial arrangement. If we are to look at these variants in more detail, we may find for the activity, single activity, amusement versus productive, societal versus individualistic, inclusive, exclusive, or harmonized, independent, universal, local. These are variants define the characteristic of a single activity. But when these activities start to interact with each other, it will yield spatial arrangement. The spatial arrangement is either described by the distribution and the intensity, or the relatedness between the activities, and the flow pattern between the different activities. These are the criteria, the two extremes of any of the descriptive criterion of the activities. And based on these criteria, we can understand all the activities hosted in any urban construct. And the result of this understanding is graphs like these. We'll end up having graphs describing the building or the urban. This is why we are calling it an urban construct, because it's always the relation between the basic architectural elements and the basic urban elements, and the interaction between these can yield the construction of a graph like this. This graph would be further added with the architecture and the urban elements that either protect or delimit, and finally it will be labeled by the visual elements. The second special feature, or the second method to describe a construct, is by the rational perspective. The rational perspective is a reduction perspective. The whole has to be reduced into its basic element and its function and utilitarian in nature. So when we are decomposing the whole into its element, the functionality of each element had to be apparent, and their rule for the whole had to be apparent. By interpreting these main qualities, we found that the rational perspective will interpret an urban construct based on its basic element at the main essence. If the space around the space exists walls, slabs, openings, and the structural typology that is interplay for either the dimmed is the wall or the slab, or the opening parts of in space. And based on this very basic elementary definition, we will end up tending to analyze the functionality, either to protect or to delimit for any of these elements apart from the structural topology. And based on the qualities of the rational perspective, we will end up having some of the criteria that is describing any of these elements, physical elements. The trick here is that when we are trying to study these physical elements, we may study these physical elements apart from each other, like the slab alone. We have a slab that is the slab that is resting over a hill or over a water, or a slab that is resting over the composition of different blocks. Or we may have an opening that is existing over a terrain or in a landscaping, just an opening, or an opening that is playing a role in a wall. This is the extreme between the delimit and the protect. In the delimit, we have the window exist by itself over a water, over a terrain, or in composition with a freestanding wall. Or we have a wall that's playing the same role, standing either to play a delimit rule or a protection rule over as an element by its own. So actually, a light can be playing a role because all of these elements can protect or delimit based on 5 environmental factors. And the role that is played by any of these elements, so if we are protecting or delimiting using lighting fixtures, it may belong to any of these, but based on certain environmental criteria. And this, of course, will affect our understanding of these elements. On the other hand, rather than looking at these elements separately, we may look at it in a composite manner, and by doing so, we will also be explaining the extents between protect and delimit, with different characteristics of all of these buildings are basic characteristics found and implied in these constructs. And the directionality was found strongly in the natural language, that all of these elements, basic elements, are related differently with a kind of directionality that's different than the others. And especially when they are working as a delimited, the role of delimiting over a landscape, over an urban scale, or the directionality will play an influential role for the design process. And the same apply, the extremes apply for the supporting typology, that is either structuring the elements directly or the composition of the elements, maybe like composite versus monolithic, and all of these would reflect differently on the conceptual space. The last special feature is the visual feature. The visual feature described the designer, the architect, the artist, the musician, the poet, is shaping an environment based on certain inspiration and certain ideology or philosophy of certain ideology, and based on that, the figural and the materialization is shaped. So the visual is always about the materiality with its dimensions of the color, the shape, and the texture. The shape can be the shape of a single artifact or the composition of the artifact. As we will find later, the visual perspective is all about, it mainly is intensified by the modification because it philosophizes existing philosophical or physical element and modifiers the modification to reinterpret these elements in another conceptual space is an integrative part of the visual environment. So here are example variants of the visual features of the urban space, including color, textures, and the assembly. And as we will be reaching the conclusion later, the knowledge base, the phenomenological knowledge base that we are constructing, the most important, the perspective that will most benefit out of this knowledge base is the visual perspective. when we are talking about we want a knowledge base, a phenomenological knowledge base to aid a creative design process. We are actually mean that to aid the visual, mostly the visual view, because of the rationale of the visual and because of plenty of other aspects. The visual is the one that will be mostly affected and that will be mostly enriched by the knowledge base that we are proposing. So what they imply? Intuitively speaking, any urban construct can be defined by the activities happening in this urban construct from one hand, and then the protection level that is occurring by the physical element, and finally by the materiality that may play with the color. Lighting can be defined as part of the color or texture or the shape of the material itself. If we are to define the urban construct based on these three layers, we will surely have a comprehensive description of urban construct. Nonetheless, the ability of describing urban construct is just the first step in understanding urban construct. To understand urban construct, or to have a phenomenological, a basic, a foundational understanding that can span the spectrum of the subjective conceptions of urban construct, we are looking for how to associate these physical, which are described as a labeled graph, these physical features to the conceptual realm. We need to map the physical realm to the conceptual realm, and this mapping is what constructing what we mean to construct, which is the phenomenological knowledge base of urban constructs. So our next step is to structure the spatial concepts in process to understand the description that we just laid of urban constructs. And this is our next step. After unfolding the physical realm using the three perspectives, this is the other goal of using the three perspectives for unfolding the conceptual. Natural language is the continuum of the concepts, and the unfolding of the conceptual world by the three perspectives means that the interrelation between the concepts found in natural language would be rephrased or reinterpreted using the three perspectives. To evaluate the successfulness of conceptualizing the conceptual by the three perspective, the criteria that we are adopting is the ability of the three perspective to disclose the variants found in any of these concepts. Because, as we mentioned earlier, it is all about the phenomenological sense of space, and it is always the structuring of the variants, the urban identity, the variants implying from the higher level to the lower level. The higher level, the variants we found to be the three perspectives. For the lower level, it would be the granularity of the concepts found in natural language. And based on this granularity, we would try to understand the spatial features or the graph the labeled graph, the interpretation of the physical realm that we introduced earlier, which is the spatial features. To reach the conclusion that the three perspective can actually disclose the variations in a coherent and consistent way of any of the concepts found in natural language, we need to test this supposition. And we are selecting the concept of functionality to test the ability of the three perspective to disclose the main variants for any of the concepts found in natural language. So what we are doing actually, we will be collecting the concepts related to any of the concepts found in natural language based on the semantic analysis of the contemporary AI contribution in natural language processing. We will collect the concepts mostly related to any of the concepts under analysis. And these concepts are restructured or reinterpreted under the contentious relation between the three perspectives themselves. This contentious relation is resolved over a conceptual space that is triangular in shape, with each of the three perspectives located in its corners. So this is what we are after. We know that natural language can be semantically analyzed as including embedding or using graphs. We are employing both of these techniques to come up with the concepts related to any of the concepts found in natural language. For the graphs, we are using WordNet and ConceptNet, and based on these graphs, founding of these graphs, we are extending the search using the embeddings of 7 corpora that is embedded using different techniques: the Google Corpora, the Facebook, the Twitter, the Wikipedia. And the embedding of these corpora is done using several algorithms, and the blend between these two approaches, which we are currently employing, would yield the graphs like this. These graphs are produced using a specifically developed tool, and these words or these concepts that are closely related to the concept of functionality would be reinterpreted or restructured over the conceptual space that is shaped by the three perspectives. By doing so, we would test our supposition that this conceptual space is capable in achieving two things. First, in structuring all the variants found in a single concept. Second, in concluding in testing the coherence and the consistency found in these concepts. So if we have a look into a more detailed format, this is the one. We'll be faced here again with the three categories of the qualities. Each of the three perspectives has three categories of the qualities: the CausedBy, the ResultsIn, and applying these over the concepts found in natural language, we will come up with clustering diagrams. The rationale for this conceptual space is that the corner contains the perspective, and these axes are of the qualities that are strongly related to each of the perspectives. So the rational will have here the qualities that are strongly related to this perspective, while the emotional, the qualities that are strongly related will distribute over this axis, and the same apply for the visual. When these qualities meet at areas like this means that we are facing a very strange phenomena where qualities do belong to the rational, but at the same time they may resemble some of the other qualities that are strongly still related to the emotional, but still at the same time there are a huge similarity between the qualities found in here, and the same applies with the visual. So in this zone of the conceptual space, we'll be faced with a strange phenomenon where things are still belong strongly to any of the three perspectives, but there is a strong resemblance between several qualities, as will be disclosed soon. And the same applies for the areas in between, where the qualities do strongly belong to any of the perspectives, but at the same time there is a confusing or a vague or a strange moment of similarity that may occur between the qualities found between these three perspectives. And this is the concept based on which this conceptual space is manifested and the qualities is distributed. We start by the CausedBy. These are the CausedBy qualities. For the rational, it's the function that is based on the application's usefulness and effectiveness. And this yields two concepts like usability, the analytical structure analytic of that yields optimality and minimalism. Search for optimality and a minimalistic approach, which could be double faces of the same analytical and usable approaches. that is driven from the functional. All this, of course, could be treated as a specific facet of its own, rather than considering it as nesting qualities from another quality. It can be looked at as a quality by its own. On the other hand, the emotion is systematic, was found to these qualities are found in natural language. Human will, when you ask any human a word of functionality, immediately plenty of concepts will boom up in his or her head. And these are the qualities that we are trying to collect. And I'm just using it as an analogy of how close these concepts is embedded to us, because they are collected from natural language. So actually, this is how we do perceive functionality, the word of functionality, as it is manifested in natural language. For the emotion, it is of systemic nature, and it is procedural in the interaction and the communication between development. It's naturalistic, varieties, and realist and humanistic in nature, while the visual was found to be aesthetic. So we have here the balance between systemic, functional, and aesthetic, and characteristics, features, techniques, craftsmanship, and materiality and expression words are all descendant of these variants. If we look at the direct implicative qualities, the qualities that is caused by, these are the causing qualities, and they will cause up the analytic will cause up the qualities of stability and usability, productivity, functionality, perfectionist, while the optimality and the minimalistic approach is mechanistic, and the comprehensiveness somehow is a direct implication of these qualities. The integration or differentiation as a source of it, and development and the community as a community. The realistic is gradualistic, and limitlessness and the humbleness will down to the earth. If you looked at the last year, the symbol of, you will come up with other qualities that are descendant of all these variants. So optimality and minimalistic may yield comprehensiveness, which will reflect on completeness, clarity, straightforwardness. Monolithic tool, a reductionist of the basically essential. And here is the area that we were speaking about earlier. If you look at the rational may be accumulated into a monolithic transparency, a minimalistic, a basic, and essentiality. Openness and spaciousness still belong to this realm, while the opposite values from the emotional perspective is the symbol, the spontaneous, or the spontaneous settlement, or the sprawl may reflect as symbol, infinitude, ornamental, complex, while the visual may reflect with lightness, emptiness, absurdity, the ontological and brutalist. These variants can be confused together when they are coexisting, or they could be thought of as different things of the same entities, and this is the entity of the all as we are calling it. So this is somehow the conceptualization of the level of the function itself. The thing that this is a conceptual space that is hosting variants of the concept of functionality. These are variants of the same concept. So if we are talking about optimality can be thought of as a variant of functional, or the naturality or the humanistic can be thought of as variant of functionality. The same applies for the visual, with the implications found on the symbol of levels. Any of these qualities by themselves can consume a horizontal space like this. So if I'm taking a space like standardized or scalability, a concept like this can be extruded horizontally by itself. This means that these concepts are not only existing on the horizontal space, but actually they can spread and manifest also on the vertical space. The goal of conceptualizing urban constructs using the concept is like this: is to map the physical the physical reinterpretation using the 3D perspective to the conceptual reinterpretation of the conceptual realm. And this mapping conclude by what we are calling conceptualization of urban concept. Because if we can understand the physical description by mapping it to the concept, this means that we can understand the urban concept in general. And this is the goal of the research. The thing is that when we try to map the physical features or the qualities that we defined in the reinterpretation of the physical realm, we were faced with a huge finding, and that is all the qualities are mappable between the rational and the emotional. It's either rational qualities, the two extremes that we were assigned earlier. The two extremes, all of the two extremes that we defined earlier for describing urban constructs, all of these two extremes, they tend mostly to be divided over two of the, including the visual extremes, sharpness versus fluidity, negative versus more thin versus bulk, basic modified, whatever. We'll find them all are dividable over only two perspectives. And actually this between the rational and the emotional. And this accentuates on the implication that we had earlier that the visual perspective is the philosopher, the modifier, that actually reinterprets and explores what is happening between these two perspectives. And by saying so, we are actually saying that any urban construct is in its entirety. It's the core of any urban construct is the activities that is happening in this urban construct and the kind of protection or delimitation or demarcation occurred by the physical element. The materiality itself can of course be correlated to the activities or correlated to the function, or belong mostly to the realm of the philosophy, or the philosophy applied as a modification over these realms, the interpretation and exploration of realities between these. And this adheres exactly to what we have been defined earlier about the reality of the visual perspective. And as a matter of fact, the findings of many of the philosophical school thoughts related to aesthetics, beauty, and art do adhere strongly to the findings of what the visual perspective is all about, and how it is supposed to behave to manifest the materiality of any urban construct. Again, we want to stress on the concept that the concept space functionality doesn't only exist in this horizontal space, but any of the concepts found in this bit is itself what distribute horizontally. Would it have a horizontal space, a conceptual space like the one we are having in front of us. And this concludes that to conceptualize functionality, the concept will not only be horizontal, but would spread horizontally and vertically as well. And this would construct the conceptual graph or the semantic network of the concept of functionality. And having the various physical features mapped to these concepts imply that we can understand the multitude of the facets implied in these urban features, on these different criteria, and upon which computation can understand the various facets of these physical description, and can actually manifest an understanding of urban constructs, and based on which computation can aid in accurate design process. So what we are meaning by the horizontal vertical, that we will end up having a graphical network, semantic network between the concepts and the signs or the description of the physical assigned to these to this large graph. So as we have evaluated the sufficiency of the three perspective in unfolding the realities found of the physical or describing the physical, for the conceptual the criteria is different. We are here seeking for the variance of urban constructs and to assess the coherence and consistency. Whatever, when we are trying to unfold any of the concepts or the concept of that concept to construct the graph, we will always end up having a coherent and a consistent form of understanding, form of conceptualization. And of course, coherentism is a main, strong philosophy for interpreting what knowledge is all about. Manifesting or constructing this form of coherent knowledge about the concept and associating it with the description of the physical would ultimately yield the comprehension that we are proposing for urban constructs. So this is what we are seeking, where we have here we have measured the comprehensiveness of the physical as it is unfolded by the three perspective from one hand, and the coherence, the consistency, and the variant exhaustive of the variance of the conceptual as it is found in natural language and reinterpreted and restructured using the very three perspective. The mapping between these two realms is what manifests what we are calling phenomenological knowledge base. This is the knowledge base that we are after, and that's going to be shared between all the human agents. So urban identity now is obscured under the reality found of this phenomenological knowledge base, because the knowledge base builds on structuring the variance in a coherent and a consistent and meaningful way from one hand, and at the same time for design creativity it enables communication to discover the multitude of the facets embedded or implied in any of the objects as they are most probably, because they are interpreted using natural language, and most probably there are huge tendency for these objects to be implied in such by the human agents, and by proclaiming so, we have manifested a phenomenological knowledge base that will enable computation to aid in a creative design process. The rational exhaustibility with the three perspective, we have to add that the three perspective, the visual, which is analogical in nature, analogical reasoning, the emotional, which is systemic, and the rational, which is deconstructive, reductionist, the rational, which is reductionist. These three forms of rationality consumes the core of the variance found in rationality in general. And the same applies for meaning, and we have tested it over functionality to test on the theme. We have agreed that the world is split between the rational and the emotional, while the visual is the philosophizer over the interest or the core found in these two perspectives. If we look closely, so this is what we are presuming, if we look closely to the technique that we are using for unfolding the physical or unfolding the physical, the conceptual, we will find that the unfolding the physical is rational technique. It actually enforces our findings for the moment, while unfolding the conceptual is an emotional technique. So unfolding using the emotional is reductionist in nature, meaning that it's like the X and Y and Z. You can use the qualities of the X and Y and Z to describe the qualities of any of the elements found in the physical world. The qualities of these, when are describing the qualities of the other elements' qualities does not affect the X and Y, the Z, by all the means. Contrary to the conceptual, in the conceptual, if a perspective is defining a conception, the defined conception itself will redefine the defining perspective, and this kind of relatedness between the systemic, the mutual or the reversal relationship between the elements, the causing or the caused by, means that they are systemic and the world can be defined, the world as we defined it, between the manifold unfolding the physical and unfolding the conceptual, do divide between the techniques found in these two perspectives from one hand, and adheres to the description found in here's the x and y z c. We are just using quantities of the x and y z c, and where we were defining the special features graph, we're using qualities of the emotional, rational, and the visual. While each of the perspective will define the concept, the variance of a concept, and consequently it itself were redefined based on these findings. This was just an important remark to support our proclamation or finding to the moment that the world is split between the rational and the emotional, while the visual is the philosophizer over these two realms. So what we have manifested so far is a phenomenological knowledge base. The phenomenological knowledge base will be used for computation to do what? To explore and to interpret which are the fundamentals of design creativity. As a matter of fact, as we have stated earlier, the visual perspective is the one who will mostly benefit the constructed phenomenological knowledge base, because it's a creative of nature, and the analogical reasoning found in the visual perspective tends to use the explorative and the interpretative, the mimicry, and the analogy interpretive forces implied in the phenomenological knowledge base. We will have here two forces that we are going to discuss briefly for the design process. Either the user would express the preferences over the conceptual graph or over whatever. These preferences will be compared to the knowledge base, and based on these preferences, the comprehension of these preferences, computation can come up with recommendations, inspirational recommendations during the design process. On the other hand, the urban identity is the composition between the basic concepts and the compositionality between the different concepts is what actually manifesting urban identity. So we are expecting in certain area, in an apartment or in a building or a block of building or a neighborhood or in a city, we are predicting certain compositions between these qualities, the quality of the rational and the emotional and the visual over the concept of functionality, over the concept of inviteness, whatever the concept you may imagine. When these concepts spread over the spectrum of the concepts of the natural language, the compositionality between the variants of these concepts is what is shaping the urban identity. And based on this compositionality, computation can pivot an understanding of urban construct that is not so common and it's not so obvious to us as designers, and based on that we are expecting to have computation to extend our commutability of the urban constructs in a preservative manner. So we will be introducing innovation and creativity in a preserved environment, environments that is preservative in nature. Like actually most of these found mostly in Europe, could be in Asia and with some other parts of the world, like Northern Africa. So if we are starting with one of the easiest approach, which is the user expresses their preferences, and their preferences are defined over the phenomenological knowledge base to come up with inspiring conclusions. We may come up with a design process. Computation can augment design process like this, in which case each of the three perspectives can aid in defining what is a design process. For the visual, a design process is all about the designer. The designer is an influential factor in the design process, and the design process can be a visual designer or an emotional designer or a rational designer. The emotional defines the design process based on a process, which is a procedure that builds over a unit, and this unit is always yielded by a generated or summarization action. that is repetitive in nature, and the rational define the design process in a structural manner, while the action that's causing the action underneath is yielding a construction between these elements. Based on this, we will come up with a single unit of action that has inputs and outputs. The inputs can be affected by the user preferences, or can be affected in parallel with the compositionality found in urban identity of a plot. And based on this unit of action, where one of the three designer will be allocated, and this designer will be acting on the conceptual space that is related to the user's preferences, or the multitude of the facets related to the user preferences, and based on the designer kind and the spatial concepts, there will be either a newly generated design or a design that's a modification of the history of the design until the moment, and the reason that will be different outputs, where the designer will still go ahead and select one or express his or her interest in variants of these designs, and based on this, that design process would accumulate into different variants from which the human agent, the user, the designer, the stakeholder can have the clarity for selecting or defining the things that they are after. So this is the design process as is defined to the moment. We may look at it in some symbolic way. We may have here the design defined over a graph, while they between the user and the designer. And based on these preferences, there will be the design process acting for proposing different variants of our parts of the design with different designers allocated to the design space that is actually related to the multitude of the facets defined by the user preferences. And this hierarchy will yield different inspiring alternatives to the design. So if we looked closely, something like that, we will have here the design expressed in differences like these, and based on that, we'll have different designers allocated over the space to come up with different suggestions for design alternatives. As far as concerned for urban identity, as we stated earlier, it's all about the compositionality. So we may have the compositionality apparent in a part of a block that is somehow composition these qualities more often together, or the opposite of these qualities with each other. And by doing so, we would grasp the notion of the tendency or the acceptability or the consequences implied in any urban area that somehow can be resembled, or the aspect or the identity of this place can be defined as such, and the computation can accentuate on the variant aspect that are actually could be absent from our eyes as humans. And this is the idea of augmented computation in the fifth industrial revolution, that to add the computation to the ability to understand and to augment our cognitive ability during decision-making process. Now we have reached the point of the computational application over the theoretical framework that have been introduced to the moment. So what we have introduced to the moment is that the ontology of urban constructs can be used to unfold the physical description, the physical reality, the physical realm, as well as the conceptual realm. These two realms are actually different in treatment, as have been described earlier. And the findings of the research until the moment adheres to how our cognitive system as humans, or any natural cognitive system that always translates the physical, the pixelation of the visual picture of an urban scene, or the stimulus of hearing or whatever, are always translated into some intermediary descriptive layer that is subject to conceptualization afterwards. The theoretical production that have been introduced so far, can be used or understood as a training dataset for the computational model to learn over this dataset and to use natural language as a base for constructing both the conceptual as a bit interpreted by the three perspectives, and to describe the physical using the graph, and then mapping the graph to the conceptual, and hence the construction of the phenomenological database. All of that is viable, but by computational exposure to big data and the AI contemporary techniques for that accompany the analysis of big data to manifest our main goal of phenomenological database. And hence computation can augment us based on this constructed knowledge. So in one of my application, I proposed two neural networks. The first is called spatial features net, which actually accepts different 3D representation or formal representation of a model, and then it maps it to the different classifier. Until the moment, it's not so sophisticated. It can only host or act on a single space. It doesn't have the capability still yet to model a building of its own, a full building that actually represents a complex graph or labeled graph, the special features graph, as has been illustrated in the special features. The other neural network, which is the most important one, is the one that constructs the conceptualization of the concept based on the three perspective interpretation of natural language. The training data set, the conceptual space, such as the one that have been introduced for the concept of functionality, would be encoded using the GLAV encoder, and then in the GLAV algorithmic encoding, which is introduced by the University of Pennsylvania, for encoding mainly the Google corpus, depending on the embedding of the Google corpus, to represent all the concepts here as words based on the 300 dimension representation of a bit representation of the words, and based on this, the concepts here are used to either train or to predict the comprehensive graph, the semantic network of all the concepts found in natural language as interpreted by the three perspectives. So this is the conceptualization, and the mapping between the special features graph and this conceptualization can be readily accessible using a third neural network. The advancement of the special features needs would entail that computation can actually look at buildings over a city, over a neighborhood, over whatever the scale, and start learning by its own. And this is as well a pillar for computation to understand the urban identity of certain places upon which the reflection can be the reflection of the composability of the concepts found in urban identity can be treated during the design process. To have these two neural networks trained or to read the predictions of these neural networks, either for construction of the graph or for the readability of the special features graph, a Grasshopper computation component is proposed, and it has most of the components needed to either train the two neural networks or to read their predictions, and some other auxiliary components that support this problem. Of course, once we have the conceptual knowledge base built, there could be some other component that would augment the design process during an augmented automated design process. And hence the role of computation that actually supports the standards of the fifth industrial revolution is attainable using the infrastructure that have been published and anchored so far. So in conclusion, data is computationally understandable or comprehensible based on one of two paradigms. The first is the embedding paradigm, where the data in one of its forms can be looked at as data, can be treated in maybe an unsupervised manner by a neural network, where the embedding of the data reflect a cognitive ability of this data by computation. The other realm is the graphs. To have a graph built over data, you are in need of ontology. The importance of the graph is that computation can now be integrated with humans over graphs, and hence we are talking about creativity. That's a main factor of representing data or understanding data based on a graph. And this is the approach the BAS our approach is supporting for the moment, is that building a graph would can be used as an infrastructure for a creative process when humans and computers can sit all together and cooperate and augment each other over a creative design process. To reach this goal, we have introduced the three perspectives that's called visual, emotional, and rational. Each of these three perspectives are independent of each other, and they are tested to assure that there are no other perspectives found to understand this. These are the most basic independent perspectives upon which you can understand. This is the highest level of variance found in different concepts, based on which you can structure and understand and justify all the other variants found in different concepts, from the higher level to the granular level, depending on the natural language. We may think about any of these three perspectives as a continuum. Each of them is a continuum of the symbol and the conceptual, and the final interpretation that is building over the individualistic interpretation of each of the three perspectives, or the synthesis of the interpretation between these several perspectives, can imply the interoperability of the world of the physical and the world of the conceptual. These two worlds can coherently, both of them, be unfolded by these three perspectives. This is the main assumption of this whole research. To reach this assumption, we presume that these three perspectives are contrasting. By contrasting, we are meaning that these are the least obvious independent three perspectives, and that these are all that is needed, and there are no other independent perspective. Any other perspective will be dependent over these perspectives, and this entails that these three perspectives can exhaust the continuum of every construct. And by saying that, of course, any of the variants can belong to one of the three perspectives, or the synthesis of any of these three perspectives. This is the direct implication of defining urban constructs by three presumably contrasting three perspectives. We have translated this contrastability between the three perspectives into the concept of sufficiency. To have three perspectives that are independent and that can actually sufficiently encompass all the variants found in the process, they have to be able to unfold the physical by introducing a comprehensive description of the physical. And this was deliberated over a labeled graph, which actually was attested that a labeled graph is producible by these three perspectives that can describe all the facets found in different constructs. And the second step was, how would we understand the labeled graph? Because if we can understand the comprehensive description of the physical, of the symbolic, then of course this would imply that there are something called a phenomenological knowledge base that's constructable based on these proposed three perspectives. On the other hand, for the conceptual, to test the contrastability between these three perspectives, for unfolding the conceptual, any of the concepts had to be tested, that these three perspectives can exhaust the variance of these three perspectives, and this exhaust exploration of any of the concepts should reflect coherence and consistency in a manner. It had been tested during the presentation of a single concept of language, that is the concept of functionality, and it was tested that actually the variance are apparent, and the coherence between these are apparent as well. The mapping between the labeled graph and the world of the conceptual implied that the multitude of facets embedded or implied in any of the special features graph, which actually the special features graph reflect the favorability of the users during the design, the users, the stakeholders, the designer, the human agents in general are reflected and represented, and it was represented related to the conceptual level. So what is the benefit now? We have argued from the first slide that we are after a knowledge base, a phenomenological knowledge base that is shareable between computation and human agents. And this goal has been reduced to the point that it is not the computational knowledge base that you are after, but you are after a knowledge base that is phenomenal. By phenomenal, we mean that it can cross the boundaries demarcated by the subjectivity of the cognitive ability of human agents, meaning that it should be universal in nature and that it can still be acceptable between the different human agents. If I have a knowledge base, a phenomenological, which is actually, when we are talking about phenomenology, it is a universal in nature, and it supersedes the limitations of the subjectivity. By maintaining its nature as a universal that can span over the different or the variants found in subjectivity. So actually manifesting a knowledge base that is coherent, consistent, and comprehensive in reintroducing the two worlds in a coherent manner means that such a knowledge base is a phenomenological in a sense that it can encompass all the variants found in the subjectivity, and if computation would acquire such a knowledge, we would guarantee for immediately that computation can augment a creative design process. Consequently, what we are proposing is that computation can understand different concepts, can understand these graphs by mapping them to the conceptual space, and this phenomenal knowledge base would imply that computation can be augmented in a creative design process. For future development, we have three main aspects of the design. That's the special descriptor or the special features graph, and the special concept, the conceptual realm, and the designing process. Each of these has either training dataset or computational implementation to get trained by this dataset, or somehow can actually be enriched by some algorithmic knowledge. These two realms in parallel are capable in producing a knowledge base and employing the knowledge base, the phenomenological knowledge base during a creative design process. These are the 6 publications that I had until the moment. I published 6 papers in the process of defining the ontology and acquiring the application of the ontology on the phenomenal aspects of place or on a creative design process. The first publication was titled A Comprehensive Proposition of Urbanism. It is published in Springer, and it was translated into Italian and republished in a leading journal in Italy. It was translated into Italian and published by a leading journal in Italy. I chaired the session in the same conference that translated the paper finally in the previous May. I chaired the session and presented a paper of mine, A Comprehensive Conceptualization of Urban Concept as a basis for design creativity. In that paper, I unfolded the viability of constructing the physical realm, the description of the physical realm, and the conceptual realm using the ontology of Urban constructs. I had 3 applications over the ontology and its development phase. One of them is called the neutrality between us and others, a framework for sustainable social, cultural, urban development. So it was published in spring as well. And I'm using it as a basis of differentiating between us and others, which is a subjective in nature. I'm trying to analyze the moment of subjectivity based on the monolithic tool of analysis offered by the comprehensive proposition of errors, which is actually foundational for the issue we are having in hand. And I've developed a computational tool for mapping the user's urban cognition. I published it in EKD. This is a direct application, fuzzy binary relationship between images of us and others. This is a direct application over this paper. And I published in the previous Cadria version a framework for a comprehensive conceptualization of urban constructs. This is a special feature. This is the 2 neural networks that are built to acquire a granular and detailed knowledge about urban constructs, and it is a direct computation application over the theoretical framework proposed in the comprehensive conceptualization of urban constructs paper. By the end, I have nothing to say, but thanks a lot. Thank you for witnessing and watching my presentation. I hope you found some interesting moments in the presentation, and I hope by the end that you have reached the convention that the proposal for automatic architecture design is viable and is promising in essence. The future development of the work we are having in hand would imply that architecture can be sensed in a more experiential way. So the concepts and descriptions implied in this presentation can be actualized over different case studies, and the viewer will witness the strength of the framework presented so far in reflecting the real, or for understanding the real in an unprecedented manner that can actually expose the variants and the possibilities and the potentials implied in any physical or in any representation. And computation can play a great role in either coping with urban identity from one hand, or in proposing interesting developments inspired by these implied realities of any physical or descriptive representation of urban constructs. Thanks a lot for watching my presentation. I wish you all the best. I'm Mohammed Izzat. Bye bye.